Hello, I am Zinfogel. So, here we have the Ghost and Poison egg event. This egg batch is surprisingly competent. You can find some utility in all of these Eggmons. Are they outclassed? Yes, as always. But please remember that you have to measure Eggmons with a different scale from standard units. Eggmons are only worth looking at when you wanted to fulfill a niche your current roster is lacking, because their stats are just a misery to work with. Anyway, the only repeat in this batch is the Muk Family, so I will do a brief summary for them. Striker Muk is a better version of Roxy. It's worse than Trifaikoga and worse than Alistair, but it's a serviceable source of poison type DPS. Support Muk is one of the more interesting buffing Eggmons. It buffs plus 4 special attack, plus 2 special defense, and plus 2 speed, but it has a slush. So, Support Muk has a 30% chance to proc poison, and it can enable dirty fighting and toxic power. It's a handy partner for Crobat or Houndoom, for example. Muk quickly raises special attack to hasten their setup, and it can enable their multipliers ahead of time. And with Venoshock, Muk can do some okay chip damage in poison weak content. Lastly, Tech Muk. This guy has a 60% chance to proc poison or paralysis with Slush and Body Slam respectively. It has Hostile Environment 1. However, you can only inflict one status condition at a time. So this gimmick is only handy for Cobalion Legendary Arena, where you wanted to inflict multiple status conditions in one team slot. Otherwise, there are more reliable free-to-play sources for both status conditions. First up, we have the Gengar family, and these guys have a unique distinction. All Gengar have Leak as their first move slot, and this is a 1-bar spam with a 30% chance to paralyze. So they have a paralysis roll compression, which has miscellaneous applications. But well, here we have Striker Gengar, and this is a decent ghost type striker. I wouldn't complain about having to use it. It has Shadow Ball, 20% chance to debuff special defense. It has self-sufficient buffs, reliable 20% multiplier, and power reserves too if it suits your fancy. The problem though is that this guy doesn't hold a candle against Giovanni. And Giovanni recently got a buff with his 6-star EX potential and his Mega Evolution. And with his Grid alone, he can output far more damage than whatever Striker Gengar can accomplish. However, Giovanni is gone. His event is not running right now. So if you miss Giovanni, I would maybe consider investing the free Eggmon resources for a 3-star Striker Gengar, because it's more comparable to Shontal or Agatha. So, Shontal and Agatha also have Shadow Ball, but they are more difficult to use as strikers because they require support. Agatha needs full offensive support, while Shontal needs crit buffs. But perhaps more importantly, their trainer moves are an active detriment. They literally hurt themselves when using their trainer moves, but Striker Gengar doesn't have that issue. Instead, it has crit buffs, so it needs a lot less support for an optimal offensive presence. So, while Agatha and Shontal are stronger because they have a lot more special attack, Striker Gengar can catch up with its super duper effective 2 multiplier. So I think it's okay if you miss Giovanni. Support Gengar is perhaps my favorite Eggmon in this batch. Reason being, it's a buffer with a tech utility. So this has plus 6 special attack buffs and plus 2 speed buffs. And unlike the more unconventional Eggmon buffing kits, this one is handy because there is a fair amount of strikers who buff crit but not a special attack, such as Silver, Koga, and Giovanni. And support Gengar can top them off offensively with no NPRs. It's reliable, so that's great. But then we have Leak enhanced by Hostile Environment 1. So my guy here has a 1-bar spam with a 60% chance to proc Paralysis. So it can reliably enable Paralysis Synergy users or Dirty Fighting. Regarding Paralysis Synergy, I am not sure how handy that is in current metagame, because when I think about special Paralysis Synergy users, I am thinking about Signature Cynthia or Claire, who appreciate crit buffs a bit more. But this is still handy, and it gives support Gengar some unique utility, even relative to gachas. But besides that, you also have Ominous Wind with Swag Bag 1. I am not too excited about this. Ominous Wind has a 10% chance to omnibuff all the primary stats, but with this you have a 20% chance of proccing your omnibuffs. But this is a utility Eggmon. You are not tanking with this, so I don't see the point of increasing your defenses. But if you want a really fun core for this Eggmon, I would suggest running it with BP Morty, because BP Morty can actually tank, and he is defensively self-sufficient. He has potion and the defense and special defense buffs, and with Ghost support theme skills, you get a fantastic core when paired with Giovanni, for example. That would be quite good. Tech Gengar is less exciting than its brethren. This is an Eggmon built for special defense debuffing, which sounds fantastic. This is a role in very high demand, but it's just not competent enough. So we have Shadow Ball, just like Striker Gengar, but it's enhanced by innate Honor Roll 1. So this move has a 40% chance to debuff special defense. This means you only have less than a coin flip chance at proccing a single debuff. So this could be okay, because Shadow Ball is a striking move. When you are using this, you could pair it with another Ghost-type striker, used to bruise enemies ahead of time, like you would play Fantina. But this thing still requires offensive support. It cannot buff a special attack, so it needs babysitting to accomplish that function, as well as a lot of move gauge, if it means to dual strike. But even then, Giovanni can perform this exact function. He has Shadow Ball on a roll 1 on his grid, so he's just straight up better, and when Striker Gengar fails to compete against Giovanni, Tech Gengar has no hope. This guy just performs poorly compared to other units. Let's say Erika and Vileplume. Erika has a couple Energy Ball on a roll 2 tiles on her 3-5 grid. So she has a 50% chance to debuff a special defense, backed up by 3 MGR2 tiles. So her debuff is more reliable, spammier, and generates move gauge. So it's a better bet for utility. And I cannot recommend Tech Gengar as a Ghost Bruiser for Champion Stadium. Not in good conscience, anyway. Ghost Weak Will has Impervious, and Ghost Weak Caitlyn loves buffing special defense. So, man, this is just not good enough. Too unreliable, too weak, needs support. I don't see a way that you can salvage take a Gengar, you are better off using a proper Ghost type striker instead. Up next, we have a new Eggmon family, starting with Striker Arbok. Much like Striker Gengar, I would argue this is a competent source of poison type DPS, and you can even discuss its viability relative to strikers in its own tier. For example, I would say this is an upgrade to a Striker Muk and perhaps a Roxy and Scolipede. Hell, maybe even Jesse and Arbok. So, Arbok is a simple striker. It's self-sufficient, physically oriented, and it has a no drawback tribal move. Poison Jab, base power is below average, but it has a potent side effect. It has a 30% chance of proccing poison. So if you land the status, you can even push extra DPS through status recoil. So that's great, and it gives Arbok some utility. But what really separates Arbok from similar strikers is its passives. These are just fantastic. Critical Strike is perhaps the best passive in the game, because it's a very consistent multiplier and it enhances your moves as well as your sync moves. And you have another easy 10% multiplier to tag on top of that. Dirty Fighting procs when the target is afflicted by a status condition, so you can activate this with a lucky Poison Jab proc. But because this is Dirty Fighting instead of a Toxic Power, it means that you can proc it with any status condition, so Arbok has some flexibility. And on top of that, you also have Terrify 1 for some defensive utility. You enter the field and you debuff the enemy's attack stat, which makes things easier for your tank. So yeah, this is quite solid. I have no major complaints about this Eggmon. Now, the issue is that every free-to-play poison-type striker has to compete with Koga, and Koga is a lot stronger than Striker Arbok. And poison weak stages in Champion Stadium can be cheesed very easily with a stall. You just have to inflict bad poison by means of using Lucy or Koga, and you just wait it out a little bit and the enemies just get ravaged by poison recoil. It's just a common trend on those stages. So poison type DPS is not that helpful, unfortunately, but Arbok is very competent, and if you want to try something different, this guy would not disappoint. Support Arbok is another speed buff in Eggmon. It maximizes speed for the party. The buffing kit is plus 6 speed and plus 2 attack, and I recently bumped the viability of this kit in the compendium because it has a great usage case. So, because this Eggmon buffs speed, it has to have a damn good reason to be used over Skyla or Roxanne. And Arbok here has a couple niches. First off, it buffs attack, so it can top off a physical striker without having to resort to fanfare too, unlike Skyla. And it maximizes speed reliably, so it doesn't depend on NPRs in order to top off another unit. And this turns Arbok into the perfect complement for physical inertia strikers, specifically Elessa, Signal Suit Grimsley, or Celine, strikers who can buff plus 4 attack and have a reliable crit on their sync nuke. And these are strikers, so they can access their 6-star EX potential for an AoE nuke, and Arbok can quickly top off all the relevant stats for their inertia nuke, and they just melt at the stage right away. So that's the sole reason this kit has viability. And while other support Eggmons can also accomplish this, like Sandslash or Scyther. Arbok has the best utility, so it's hands down the best Eggmon at performing this function. First off, you have a 35-1 for some defensive utility, you know their enemy attack, you have immunity to any status ailment at least once, and you also have endurance. So if Arbok has to tank, it is nearly guaranteed to hang on for long enough to complete its buffs. And you also have a Poison Sting for a 30% chance to proc poison, so Arbok can contribute offensively in some fashion through status recoil. So if you really like using Elesa or Celine, I highly recommend that you invest in this Eggmon. This guy is really good for inertia clears. 3 words: reliable, bad, poison. Tech Arbok has Poison Fang enhanced by Hostile Environment 1. Poison Fang has a 50% chance to inflict bad poison, but with this passive, the chance is doubled. So Tech Arbok uses Poison Fang and guarantees bad poison. This is an incredibly rare quality, and it gives this Eggmon an automatic useful tiering. The most reliable source for bad poison is BP Erika, and she is free to play, but she is a BP sync pair, and those tickets have some contention. Most people will tell you to pull BP Surge or BP Morty before pulling BP Erika, and the next best reliable user is Sinasur Leaf. And then we have to consider the free-to-play alternatives like Koga, Lucy, or Teke Golbat. And now our list is over. Bad Poison is used very hard to come by, and the fact that this guy can use it reliably is a very powerful perk. Which means that we have to assess Tech Arbok's utility relative to the other Bad Poison users. But why is bad poison such a big deal? The reason is that it differs from regular poison. Whenever a target suffers from bad poison recoil, it keeps bumping up over time. It just increases in damage exponentially, and it's the sole reason that almost every enemy in this game has Listen Poison 9 as a passive, because they would get breaked by bad poison recoil otherwise. And bad poison is the reason Stall became a viable archetype for Champion Stadium Master Mode, because you can let bad poison handle damage while you focus your resources on the survival of your party. So it's just a different way of playing. But if you don't care about bumping up a bad poison, Tech Arbok is a really good toxic power enabler, because it reliably spreads poison immediately. So you can pair it with Koga, for example, and while Koga buffs up, you can use Tech Arbok to spread bad poison ahead of time, used to prepare the battlefield for Koga to go murk everything. And that is perhaps the best function for this Eggmon, because when it comes to stalls, it's a little lacking in defensive utility. Everything it has is a 35-1 used to nerf enemy attack by one stage, which helps, but this guy needs some recovery babysitting so it doesn't die immediately after a few sinks from the enemy. But otherwise, I would say Arbok is a better feed for its offensive presence, because it has Venoshock, so it's essentially a baby version of Koga. Sans grid and multipliers and offensive presence, but it has some serviceable poison type DPS. You go around spreading bad poison, buff up your crit, and Venoshock can do some okay chip damage. And that's pretty much everything there is to say about this Eggmon. Quite good, especially if you chose to skip a BP Erika. And even then, Tech Arbok procs poison type skills. So it has different utility from BP Erika or Zenyasu Leaf. This is a good Eggmon if you have the structure to play right. Lastly, we have the Weezing family. The image is missing here, but unfortunately, these are your classic filler Eggmons that DNA utilizes to thin out the quality of your hatches. They all have a poison utility, so they aren't a lost cause per se, but there are just better alternatives out there. Anyway, first off, we have Striker Weezing. It's a worse version of Striker Muk and Arbok by virtue of its multipliers, but it's basically identical to them. So, Slush Bomb is the exact same base power as Poison Jab, but it's just a special version. It has the exact same poison rate. And Striker Weezing shares its buffing kit with Striker Muk, but instead of a Slush, you have a Smog for a 1-bar spam. And this would be a distinguishing niche because it has a better poison chance than a Slush, but it's inaccurate. So you cannot use this in gauge emergencies because you are very likely to miss, and the whole point of a 1-bar spam is to regain some move gauge because you are short and you want to see that animation happen just to attempt to regain some back. So that's tough. Compared to Striker Muk, you have Super Duper Effective 2, so Striker Weezing has 10% less multipliers, and you exchange Power Reserves 2 for Dauntless, which can be handy because Power Reserves 2 is difficult to set up, so you cannot expect it to happen realistically. But Dauntless is about equally as useful, because not very many stages spam Discourage. The ones that do just wanted to nudge you into using physical damage instead. So, yeah, Striker Weezing is serviceable, but Striker Muk and Arbok are stronger. Support Weezing maximizes defense for the party reliably, but this buffing kit is indirect contention versus Skyla, and Skyla is a strictly better unit. She has better stats and potion for recovery. So, in order to salvage this Eggmon, we have to consider it as backup for Champion Stadium, assuming that Skyla has already been spent for another stage and you have a better tank that can benefit from these defensive buffs. And provided that this Eggmon offers utility that Marlon or Drake cannot cover, it may be worth the investment. So, Support Weezing has poison utility. It has Smog and Slush. Smog is inaccurate and you don't have a pinpoint entry or piercing gaze, so we have to focus on Slush instead. Slush is a 2-bar move with a 30% chance to poison. This functions in a similar vein to support Muk, and I rated that Eggmon fairly high for Eggmon standards. But the difference with Support Muk is that Support Muk has special attack buffs to enable fast offense, while Weezing has a more defensive playstyle. And in that case, you will be relying more on its ability to spread status recoil to rack up damage on the enemy. But Poison is a fairly weak status condition because most enemies have Listen Poison 9, which is the reason Bad Poison is preferable. And I don't know, if I wanted to spread Poison and have a defensive tank, I would go to James and Weezing instead. So it really depends on playstyle. This is not a bad Eggmon, and if you can find a structure that benefits from activating Dirty Fighting or Toxic Power on the long term, then this guy is decent, but I personally wouldn't use this Eggmon. Lastly, we have Weezing. Theoretically, this is a phenomenal Eggmon because it has Poison Gas. This is a strong status move that spreads poison across the entire enemy field. It's inaccurate, so it may miss across multiple enemies, but you're spreading a status condition rather quickly, so you can enable Toxic Power or Dirty Fighting with a single move. But we have to contextualize how important this function is, because it's the only utility that Weezing brings to the table. Its trainer moves are poor. You have X speed and this one that buffs defense and special defense by 1 and applies regeneration, but you cannot use this as a tank. Like, these offenses are getting popped. This is like tanking with a striker. And your passives are not doing you any favors. You only have Antitoxin for a poison immunity and a hostile environment to enhance Slush's chance to poison, but you already have a Poison Gas, so I don't really see the point of this move. Now, when you wanted to enable a multiplier this quickly, it's because you have a potent striker who needs that multiplier, and you want to pair them with some support who can enable fast offense. For example, Torchic, Faulkner, Sabrina, what have you. In the case of Weezing, its best partners are Toxic Power users, because it's a poison type tech, so it wants to activate poison theme skills, but you can maybe use this as a partner for Alistair, for example, because he has a Toxic Power 3 and would have to spend time spreading poison with a Slush Bomb, but Weezing can quickly enable that multiplier for him. Same deal for Koga or Pulmeria. But the problem here is that when I am using Koga or Plumeria, I want to use their trainer moves first because they need to raise evasion or speed respectively. So it's not like they are attacking turn 1. And in that case, I could be using another poison support instead. For example, Tech Arbok or BP Erika, who offer wider utility than Tech Weezing. Like, Koga is spamming his trainer move 3 times because he needs maximum evasion for Blind Spot and Bob and Weave. And in that time, Tech Arbok can spam Poison Fang to the entire enemy field and give you a stronger status and then Venoshock DPS. BP Erika, conversely, has good gauge generation and infestation for additional status recoil. And Tech Weezing just sits around clicking Slush. So this is just not very useful in current metagame. Like, back in 3v9 metagame, I was frothing in the mouth when James and Weezing were launched because I really wanted a fast means of spreading poison for Koga. But in the 3v3 metagame, this is not that important anymore, and well, it has utility, but this is still worse than James and Weezing. If you have him, this Eggmon is not even worth looking at, but AoE Poison has its applications. I just don't think it's that good anymore. Oh, I actually spent 30 minutes talking about Eggmons, and these are already some of the least popular videos in this channel, so that's wonderful. Either way, this batch has a lot of decent Eggmons. Very few are straight up outclassed by the other units, and even then, you can justify their use if you really want to. But nothing in this batch is urgent per se, it's just improvements to previous Eggmons. But well, that's it for this video. Thank you for watching, take care, stay healthy, and I hope to see you another time.